I am Lauren Camachi. I am the marketing content writer and manager here at Inedo, and I'm joined today by my colleague Rich.
Hi, I'm Rich Hessinger. I'm one of the products engineers here at Inedo.
And we are here today to talk to you about an exciting new development in BuildMaster and excitingly in ProGet as well, container support and first-class support for Docker. So let me get my screen share back on. And we will get started with containers in BuildMaster 6.2. And if you have any questions along the way, please do type them in the box. We do have time for questions at the end here. So let's start. Rich, tell us a little bit more about what's new in 6.2.
Yeah, so in BuildMaster 6.2, we added Git-based configurations, which allow you to basically store your different asset files, your pipelines, variables, whatnot, all inside of a Git repository. And it allows you to do extra things like Git branching and kind of work in that normal development process. We've also split up our resource credentials now into two things: secure resources and secure credentials. Where secure resources is really just a way of securing your third-party connections, and then your secure credentials are the credentials to those or to credentials you need internal to your build.
We are also glad to have template-based applications, and this is not your average application template that is rigid and not actually very helpful. These are full script-level application templates that really make releasing a real breeze. And to prove that, in our last webinar, and some of you may have joined us for that, I actually released all the way to production something using these application templates. So they are actually that easy. And if you want to see that, we will make sure to link you to that in the material that we send you after the webinar today, because part of what we will be using is more of these application templates. So you could see how they work for yourself. And of course, something else we're excited about, and you're all excited about too, or you wouldn't be here, first-class support for containers. But we are super excited about the fact that we got rained out last time when we tried to do this webinar, because it gave 5.3 version of ProGet a chance to come out in beta. So Rich, tell us a little bit more about ProGet 5.3.
Yeah, so we've added NuGet v3 API support in addition to the existing NuGet v2 support, which is really exciting for everyone who's using NuGet. We've also added in a new out-of-box experience that is much more similar to BuildMaster.
It's really nice. I just got a chance to see it today. I really like it.
We've also added a whole bunch of new containers features. So yes, we've simplified the UI around container registries and actually some of the other package feeds out there. We've enhanced versioning within containers, allowing you to actually enforce strict versioning with semantic version 2. So this is pretty awesome there. We've also gave the ability for vulnerability scanning, both from allowing a manual process like we have in packages to an actual automated image layer scan, which is really cool. And we also included ways of blocking those vulnerable images from even being able to do Docker pulls. We've improved our container layer visibility in the UI, as well as we've also improved our Helm charts, where you can actually now automatically link your Helm charts to your container repositories in ProGet, which is really nice for that whole linking aspect. As well as we've added some container and package usage directly into ProGet that can query Otter as well as Kubernetes API directly, which is really exciting.
So the reason we bring this up is because today's demo is going to show you a really nice relationship between BuildMaster and ProGet. And so we wanted to let you know that containers is really at the forefront of Inedo's mind right now in all of the tools that we're working with. So as we said, this is out in beta right now. So what we're going to be using today won't rely on these features heavily, but just so you know, it's available in ProGet too. So what we're going to do here now that we're going to get into the actual containers content is we're going to turn off our webcams so that you don't have to stare at us the whole time. I'm just going to hide mine, and Rich is going to close his off. Okay, so let us talk about containers. So as you all know, containers are a seismic shift in the development landscape. I mean, think about it. It's only been about 10 years since microservices even began. And nowadays, you can't swing a cat without hitting a container in the development world. Containerized developments have a lot of benefits that make them so popular, including encapsulated dependencies and process isolation. And I could tell you about both of these, but Rich would do a better job with it, so he'll tell you more.
Yeah, so encapsulated dependencies is really just a way of building in all of the requirements to run your application directly into your container. So then this way you don't have to rely on a customer or your infrastructure team to build all of these pre-requirements to install your app on a server. Process isolation is a way of isolating out your application's processes so the other containers or applications running on that server are working isolated from each other. So then this way we kind of improve that security, and you don't have to worry as much about different applications accessing another application when it's unintended.
So, encapsulated dependencies and process isolation are really great benefits of containers. But as you probably know, they're really difficult to build and maintain and can even introduce security risks that are big enough that some companies won't even allow you to develop using them. The 2020 market demands unprecedented speed and total security and compliance. It's no longer an either or, it's definitely a both and. And containers both enable and challenge this. They help it because they have environment parity to reduce development time. They let you deploy really rapidly, and process isolation makes running things more secure. But they're overwhelmingly complex to build and maintain. Tags are not versioned or named strictly, and container design can present some real compliance challenges. Rich, let's talk about these each a little bit more.
One of the current challenges with containers are very messy tags. As I mentioned in ProGet 5.3, we're adding a way to enforce strict versioning on these, but when you look at some of the existing ones out here, latest 1, latest 2, latest 3, they don't really care what those tags are or what they mean. I actually got burned by this a couple of weeks ago where thought I was using the latest version because I was using the latest tag, and come to find out I was 6 versions behind.
Ooh, oh no.
Yeah, it was not fun.
So we try to solve that, and we will show you how. One of the other things about containers that could be a real problem is that they are super complex.
Yeah, so when you're building your different containers, I mean, really you have to think about a whole bunch of different pieces. You have to worry about which server it's running, which architecture, which daemon it's running on. Is it Windows? Is it Linux? What commands do you need to run? What base image? What layers do you need in between? It really becomes very complex to maintain, and especially if you have to switch something out at the lower levels.
And for those of you who are terrified that I'm going to be releasing a container, don't worry. It's not going to be me. Rich is going to run this one because they are, in fact, very complicated, even though we make them a lot easier. And either way, they're a bit challenging when it comes to security and compliance.
Yeah, so one of the biggest problems out there right now is it's hard to figure out which containers you should use, which ones have a vulnerability in them. Which ASP.NET Core version should I be using for my application? Because if you go to Microsoft's site, they have 4 different versions of it. Which one should I choose?
Right. So it gets quickly complicated in such a way that could present real threats to security and compliance. So Inedo wanted to change that. BuildMaster's first-class Docker support and 2 separate container templates simplify containers and double down on security and compliance. We are trying to change the game with containers, and we do this in a couple of ways. First, we simplify overwhelming complexity by separating base and application container images. This is really important, so we're going to get into this in more detail in just a second. But also, we bring order out of chaos by providing clarity and visibility with semantic versioning and ultra-clear dashboards. We ensure compliance 2 ways, storing versioned Docker files in BuildMaster and also allowing access to multiple registries in ProGet. We offer environment parity rather than developer parity, solving the "will it worked on my machine" whole problem. And we add a reusable process and greater rigor to container use. But it's that first one that's super different and important. So Rich, tell us more.
Sure. So Inedo is recommending a new kind of practice when it comes to how we've implemented containers into BuildMaster. And I say new, and it's not really that new. But what we're trying to do is we want you to separate your base image from your application image. And we do that by having two different application templates, one for your base and one for your application image. With the base image, what we're trying to have there is really everything you need to run your application. The problem with base images today is right now there's a ton of them on Docker Hub. And like I said, it's hard to figure out which one you should use. That causes security and compliance problems because you need to figure out which one you're going to use, and it has to go through your compliance team. And then if you have a vulnerability, what do you do from there? So when it comes to different base images, these really should be managed by your system architects and your system engineers, and it should be going through a proper compliance process. So we want to start by having your base image process. And then we move over to your application images. And that really is just the container that's running your application itself. Since your base image has everything you need to run your application, this should just be something sitting right on top. If you notice these pictures here, we show that. The base is at the very bottom of the Docker container and the application's at the top. We're really trying to to simplify how you deploy your applications in containers, and two, how you manage them as you build them out.
Right. Let's see this in action. Let's see how it works to do these in two separate ways. So what we're going to do is Rich is going to yank control away from me right now.
All right. All right. Can you see my screen, Lauren?
I can see your screen, Rich.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to start off with BuildMaster and ProGet. So I'm using ProGet to store all of my containers, and I'm using that for my container registry. I'm going to be switching back and forth between the two, and I'll do my best to call out when I do that. A good way to know which one I'm in is we have the orange icon here for BuildMaster and the blue icon here for ProGet.
Yes.
And in ProGet, so far, I've set up just two container registries, my base images and my application images. We recommend to actually keep those separate in separate registries because it allows you to do things where you have your system engineers and your system architects maintaining your base images. And as long as you're using a paid version of ProGet, you can actually lock the security down on that feed. And you can say, okay, only my system engineers and system architects have access to my base images. And this way they can maintain it and you don't have to worry about that extra compliance risk.
Right.
All right, I'm going to flip back over to BuildMaster now. And we're going to start by creating our base image application. So I start off by creating an application.
Now this looks awfully familiar to me from the last webinar that we did.
Yes, indeed. And I'm going to scroll down to the Docker base image.
And look at that, same little images from before.
Yeah, I wonder where I got that for the presentation. All right, so I'm going to start by calling this my Inedo ASP.NET Core image. I'm going to create the application. All right, so we come up to my favorite screen, which is the application startup template screen. I love this screen because it gives you that bird's eye view of what's included in this template, as well as it calls out some different pieces that you have to update.
Right, and I love that it's very, very clear that you have to update it before you move on. It doesn't even let you continue. That message at the bottom lets you know it's time to fix things first.
Yes, and it's really awesome because say you still want to try, you could kick off a build through the new build screen here, but most likely it's not going to work because you need to set these.
Right.
So I'm going to start by setting my container source. So this is using a secure resource, and I need to wire this up to my container registry. So I'm going to switch over to ProGet real quick. I'm going to go to my base image registry, and I'm going to pull my repository URL. I can just simply come up here and copy it from the upper right corner, back to BuildMaster, and I put that in my registry prefix. So we know where these images should go. Now, in my case, I actually require authentication to push containers to my ProGet instance. So I'm actually also going to select my credentials. Now, if you don't have them set up, there's a create button right here. You can create your credentials right here, or you can manage them at the BuildMaster level. If you're looking to get a little more information around this and application templates with it, I highly recommend watching the application template webinar.
And you know, Rich, I love that and you'll see it in the next one with edit this field. We've sort of, I'm going to make a joke at my own expense. We sort of Lauren proofed this thing, right? The edit this field, it makes it, we try to make it so easy for anyone to be able to use this software and to still be able to do it effectively without too much external guidance.
Exactly. So in this, I came into the container repository now, and I'm going to put in my container repository name. So I'm going to be using Inedo ASP.NET Core. So this is what I expect to show up as in my Docker registry. So say the variable, and there we go.
And that bottom message changed.
Yep. Now, before I kick off a new build, I do want to highlight a couple areas of this template. So the first thing I'm going to show is the Docker file. We mentioned earlier in the presentation that we want to store the Docker files directly in BuildMaster. Part of the reason we do this is because, one, your system engineers and your system architects really should be the ones that are maintaining these base images for you. So when you're working with the base image, you're really only dealing with one Docker file, and to create a whole repository for one file seems like a little bit of overkill. BuildMaster stores this Docker file inside of BuildMaster, or if you're using a Git raft, it's still going into Git, but it also maintains a version history of this file, so you know who changed it, when it changed, and it also will then link up to your build, so you know what version of the Docker file was used for which build. Just really nice. So now, instead of having to create this whole registry or repository just for this one Docker file, it's now done for you. So, and as you can see here, if I click on this, you can actually see a history. And if I were to click on one of these versions, you would see what changed. Now in this case, I didn't actually change anything, so there's nothing to show, but you also get that same kind of file comparison. So you still get all those benefits that a source control would give you. It's just, it's really a source control inside of BuildMaster.
Right, all in one place.
Yep. So the next thing I want to show is the build script. So this is our AutoScript plan for how we actually build these base container images. And it's simple, it's one step. Now, I don't know what everyone's knowledge is on building containers, but there's quite a few commands that go into actually building a base image. We've simplified this pretty significantly with having really only one step, where we specify our Docker file, any extra template arguments, what our container registry source is, what our name is, if we need to pull anything from the working directory, all these steps. Now, one cool thing about this is having a Docker file inside of BuildMaster, we also can leverage the variables that exist inside of BuildMaster. So if you have something where you want to use a tag for building your ASP.NET Core image, you could actually create a variable directly in BuildMaster and leverage that inside of your Docker file directly.
Okay. So you said this looks like it's just one thing. How many steps would this be if you had to do it not in BuildMaster?
Well, to start off with, you got to build a Docker file, which you still have to do here, but you got to run a Docker pull and a Docker build and a Docker tag and a Docker push, and it's quite a few steps. So it's at least 5 to 6 steps to do this. Mind you, each of those steps you're going to run and then you're going to wait. And then if you're like me, I'm going to go do something else while that's running and I'm going to forget about it. So this whole process just takes longer.
Right. Okay. So let's see it. Let's go ahead and see what happens now. I'm excited.
All right. So I'm going to create a new build. Okay. First off, I have to create a release, semantic versioning. So although semantic versioning enforcement doesn't come out till ProGet 5.3, by leveraging these normal release version numbers, you can still kind of get that same process through your build with BuildMaster and ProGet here too. So created my release and I'm going to create my build.
Okay.
All right, so we actually have a nice live log output so you can see what's coming out of Docker.
Right. Now, I see that it's putting down a lot, what seems like a lot more data than you'd get in a non-containerized build.
Yeah.
And it's taking longer. Okay, and I'm very spoiled, right? It's 30 seconds so far. Big long wait. But if you've experienced using BuildMaster before, you know that usually these things take about 8 seconds. So can you tell me why it's taking so long?
Yeah. So in this case, a lot of this has to do with your internet connection, your server speed, so on and so forth. Mainly because in this case, I have to pull an image from the Docker hub to build my base image. So
Oh.
I have to, depending on which image I'm using, in this case, I'm also using a Windows container, which tend to be larger than a Linux-based container. So this is all pulling these down to my local machine to do all the work first before it pushes it to my ProGet registry. So after we do this once, if I were to run this again, it would actually go pretty quick because I already have a cached version of that base image locally on my drive.
Okay. So, okay. And again, I stress a minute and 20 seconds isn't very long to wait, especially considering if you were to do this by hand, you said it would take, half an hour or something because you have to run them all individually and keep running, walking back. And
well, not quite a half an hour, but it can definitely feel like it. And if you get as distracted as I do, it could definitely be a half an hour.
right.
So
Okay.
if you've seen some
Now
of our other application templates, sorry, go ahead.
I see fewer pipeline stages. Is that normal?
Well, in this case, we try to include what our best practices are inside of our application templates. And those best practices can change based off of which architectures you're using. In this case, for the base image, we have a test image, which is our RC image, and we have our production image. You could have another environment if that's what you use, but typically when you're working with Docker in base images, you're going to have a test image for a very short-lived amount of time. It's pretty rare you're going to be deploying that out very far. So we typically only include a testing and a production release for this template.
Okay.
So I'm going to hop over to ProGet real quick, and I'm going to see if my image shows up. And there it is.
There it is.
So I can click on this inside of ProGet, and I can see here's my version, 1.00 RC1. So my test image is up there. It's ready to use.
Yeah.
I'm now going to push out a production version of this because I don't need to test it. I've tested it enough times over the last couple of months here. And now what this is going to do is this is going to pull this image back down. In this case, it already exists, so it's going to be a lot faster. And it's going to retag it as a production version 1.0.0 and push it up. So as you saw, that's pretty quick.
Right.
If I come back over to ProGet and refresh the page here, now I can see both my versions, 1 and 1 RC1. So now in ProGet 5.3, this interface changes quite a bit. There's a lot more information here, and it's a lot easier to digest what you have. So I definitely, if you guys can, go out and look at the beta version of ProGet 5.3. It's really awesome. And coming with BuildMaster and ProGet integrations, it's going to be awesome.
So, right. Rich, you're using ProGet a lot in this one, and obviously we love ProGet, but do you have to use ProGet to be able to use containers in BuildMaster?
Technically, no. You can use any container registry as long as it supports Docker login and then the standard Docker push commands. If it does require something that's a little more specialized, well, then you can just nix the whole first class integration with Docker and you can just run straight up command line executables. So you kind of really have as much variety as you need. We try to make BuildMaster work for all knowledge levels, from the beginner all the way up to the expert.
Right. But obviously, because they were designed together and because the most recent release of each of them was based around making Docker container support first class of a feature, it's kind of worth trying them together.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we have a base image. Now it's time to create the actual application image. So I'm going to come back to applications here, and I'm going to create a new application again. This time, I'm going to select the Docker CI/CD build. So If you haven't seen any of Inedo's demos yet, then this might not be super familiar, but we use Profit Calc for pretty much all of our demos. And the whole reason being is we have it written in a wide variety of different languages, and it's at the ready. So in this case, we're using Profit Calc. This application template actually comes out of the box wired up to our .NET Core version of Profit Calc. So come back to the application startup template screen. There's a lot more here, but I really like this again because it is very much a bird's eye view of what you have here with descriptions. So I'm going to start off by setting up my base image source and my base image name. These are the same things that we used in the previous build. So I'm going to click on it here, flip back over to ProGet, go to my base images repository, and I'm going to copy and paste this. The main reason I'm copying and pasting is because I know how well I am at typing, and I will probably typo during this. So, all right, and I'm going to select my ProGet admin again because, again, I have authentication required to push these up to ProGet. Now I'm going to go to my base image name and, again, copy and paste from ProGet so I don't misspell this.
So Rich, could you use a base image that's not coming out of one that you built in BuildMaster? Could you just use a random one?
Yes, so you could wire this up to Docker Hub and use it that way. You could wire it up to any other private registry. Just because we recommend using a base image and storing it this way, it doesn't mean that you can't use it from Docker Hub. At the end of the day, you're still using a base image. It's just your base image is out on the internet and you don't have as much control over what one you're using, as well as a compliance process around it, which is why we recommend this process.
So if you had to be restricted by something that is ever changing and ever more fussy, like socks, that
yes,
building your own base images gives you that extra layer of control that would let you sort of make sure that you are definitely okay with socks and other compliance regulations, right?
Yeah, and especially as SOX every year seems to get more and more complex. There's more and more requirements. So this really does check a lot of those boxes around that process. And if you're using ProGet 5.3 and you use the vulnerability scanning, you get that automatic, like, hey, there's a vulnerability. We need to change out this base image immediately. So it really does all play to that compliance aspect.
Okay.
So I'm going to now add my container source for my application container. So I'm going to go back to ProGet, and in this case, I'm going to use my app images registry. Copy this, come back here, set this. Again, now I'm using the same credentials in this case. Like we said before, like one of the advantages of splitting it up into two registries is you can control the security of who has access to what. This would be an area where you'd actually have two different logins to go to your base image applications versus your application images. So I'm going to save that. And lastly, I'm going to set up my container repository name for my application image. So in this case, it's going to be Inedo Profit Calc. All right. Now, you may have noticed I didn't set a tag for which base image to use. I will get to that, but just wanted to highlight that we don't set that up inside of our variables yet. All right. Now, I want to show a couple of things real quick, just like I did with the base images. You have a Docker file, and I did mention before that you can leverage some of those variables from BuildMaster directly in the Docker file. This is a way of doing it. So in this case, we're actually using a variable function, and I'll try and zoom in here so people can see this. We're using a variable function with our different variables. So then this way, we're able to automatically extract out the base image right into our Docker file without having to go through and change this every time we need to switch out a base image. And I'm going to hop over to scripts. So for those of you who have done builds in BuildMaster already, what you'll notice is our build script here is actually just a normal application build script. We're building our application like you would do anywhere else. But the package script is where it gets a little bit more interesting, because this is where we're actually doing the Docker container pieces. And just like we showed in the base image, we've really simplified this. Now, you'll see two options here. And we actually have two ways of doing this. You can use it with a Docker file or without a Docker file.
Huh.
Now, I'm going to do it without the Docker file because I already showed you how to do it with a Docker file. So this step is the same. I'm just going to remove it. Now, the reason I removed it is we could have left it in here in this case for this build, but having two different steps running, what we're going to end up doing is just running Docker build twice. We don't need to do that. So we include both options inside of the application template, so it gives you a choice of which way you want to do. And again, like I said before, we cater to both the beginner and the expert when it comes to Docker knowledge. So if you have a very complex Docker file, we'll go the Docker file route. But one of the cool things about the no Docker file route is this allows you to build an application and containerize it right away. And leveraging things like application templates, it allows you to take your junior developers and they can actually now containerize their application without having to really know Docker.
Okay. Okay, so it's essentially a way to learn by doing, that you can have fast time to value while still giving access to the CI/CD tool to those who don't have as much experience.
Exactly, and you leverage your senior developers, your system architects to do the complex Docker pieces, and then this way you can make your own application template and reuse it for your lower knowledge devs, or even to just speed up your development process as a whole. Our whole goal with BuildMaster 6.2 was how can we get the application from the developers to the customers as fast and secure and compliant as possible. These are just a number of ways we do that. So to go in through here, so we have our image. So this is the one we're building. This is our application image. We have our base image tab. So this is what layer we're calling it from. This is the base image that I used in the previous one. Again, you can see base image tag. I'll get to that. Contents is pretty basic. It's just what application do you need to bring in, which is app, and then what command does it need to run when you go to run your container. You can also include things like environment variables, data paths, and really tie all this up and go as advanced as you need to. You can also work in the custom configuration templates inside of BuildMaster too. I'm not going to get into that, that's a whole nother thing, but you can leverage those in order to wire up all those extra parameters you need in your Docker run commands. So I'm going to save this and we're going to run.
I'm shaking my head like I know what you're talking about. And I think I understand it, but I'm not your audience.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing with containers. There's so many things you can do and so many ways to build them. That's what makes them so complex. And that's what we're really trying to do, is simplify this process.
Right.
So again, I created a new build. I got to create a release. I'm going to go version 1.0, create the release. And here's our build page. Now, this is really cool here is we've specified the base image tag here. So now I'm going to go 1.0.0. Now, that allows us to specify our base image at build time. You can set this as a variable so it doesn't ask you every time, but what it allows you to do is if you were to get, say, a vulnerable base image and you need to switch it out, build a new base image, you just come in here, kick off a new build with a different base image tag, and there you go. Now you've just swapped out the middle and base contents of your container with the change of one tag. You don't have to do anything else to get that out there. So we'll run the build here.
All right. So this one's going a lot faster, obviously.
Yeah, so this is our first build. So this is just building the application. At this point, we haven't got to the point of packaging the container yet.
So I love one of the things I super love about BuildMaster is the log outputs because they can be used for auditing and compliance. And if you have everything in, oh, are we getting some really horrible feedback right now?
This may be me. I just got a notification that I'm having slow internet and that I should turn my webcam off.
Oh no, don't do that. Just mute yourself for a second, would you?
Sure thing.
All right. So I was going to say about the log outputs, it gives you the ability with security and compliance, if everything is in BuildMaster and everything is in ProGet, it really simplifies your ability to go find stuff for the auditor in lickety split. And these log outputs are also a great teaching aid because they give anyone who's learning the software the ability to go back and view the logs to see, especially if something went wrong, where did it go wrong and why did it go wrong, so that you can learn from it yourself without having to say, hey, manager Rich, can you teach me what I did wrong here? My container keeps not working right. You're still muted, Rich.
Am I good now? All right, excellent. So yeah, exactly. It's all based off your retention policy. So what, how long you want to keep those logs. If you have a much more strict compliance team that kind of needs that history, you can increase that. That's one of the features inside of BuildMaster. And then it ties it all together. And again, you get to see which Docker file it was built with, so on and so forth. All right, so I was afraid this was going to happen because it seemed this is a bug inside of .NET Core 2.1. If any of you guys have used .NET Core 2.1, you've probably seen this before. They have this weird locking issue on build, and it's about a 50% chance that this happens, and it's a live demo, so of course it's going to happen. So I'm just going to rebuild this.
Therefore, 100%.
This should work this time. Of course, it's a live demo. Okay, there we go. So it worked. All right, so now we're actually going through and packaging our application into a container, and we're pushing this up to ProGet.
Okay, so I see that we've moved on to target to package.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so we've now just published our containerized version of our application to ProGet. I'm going to switch over to ProGet real quick, and I'm going to show my image. Here it is, Inedo Profit Calc, and all versions, 1.0.0 CI. So coming back over to BuildMaster, again, like we mentioned before, we try to include the best practices with our application templates. In this case, we do recommend going to an integration environment, a test environment, and a production environment. So I'm actually going to deploy this container out to our integration environment, which this is also really awesome because this will go through, and now, just like we had with applications and being able to deploy them out, you can also deploy your containers out. And I'm going to flip over and just show that script real quick, but it's a first class integration for that too. So one step, we can come out here and we select our container source, and then our repository name, what tag we want to use, and then I mentioned configuration templates. It's using a configuration template here, and it's now running my Docker container out on the server.
Cool.
And real quick, as long as my connection is still good here, I will demonstrate that I have my container running. And there we go. We can see my container is up and running. We can see it's version 1.00 of Profit Calc, and so we deployed it out. That's awesome.
Cool.
So I'm not going to go through the steps of deploying it out to everything here. We've already done that by pushing it up through the containers, but as you can see, you can still go through the normal process. And if you want to see more about this process and the things you can do, I really recommend going to our application template webinar, where we cover that as well as how to make your own application template.
Right, right. And so with that, Rich is going to give me back control if I can do that. Yes. All right. So to recap, we showed you a lot today. I am aware that we showed you quite a lot today, but to recap what we showed you how BuildMaster simplifies complexity by separating base and application images. We bring order to chaos with semantic versioning and ultra clear dashboards. We ensure total compliance by separating that stuff out, give you environment parity, and give you a reusable process with greater rigor.
So the long and short of it is it's fast, organized, and compliant.
Yep. So, much more important than anything else we've said today, we would love to answer your questions. And by we, I mean Rich, but we'd love to hear your questions. So, if you have any, we'd love to have you type them into the little question box right now. I know we've had a few come in during the course of the webinar right now. So, I'm going to turn off pause the screen share here, and we can have the questions up. And so, Rich, do you want to go ahead and field some of these questions, since I have absolutely no hope of answering them properly?
Sure thing. So one of the ones we had come in is, hey, we saw that you're using Windows containers. Since BuildMaster and ProGet are primarily a Windows piece of software, are we limited to only Windows containers? And the answer to that is no. You can use Linux, you can use Windows, anything that's running Docker, really you can integrate with. When it comes to Linux, you have to use a SSH connection to a server. You can set that up directly in BuildMaster, and it would work the exact same way that it did with Windows containers, except for your base images are probably going to be substantially smaller. I will make a note that on Ubuntu, in the newer versions with Ubuntu Snap, there is a little bit of weirdness. I'm working on getting some updated documentation out there now on how to work with that, just because it kind of changed where file paths are, and it's just a little tougher to get that set up.
We did have one question sidebar come in asking us what's the weather in Cleveland right now, and if you're not from this area, it's snowing in mid-April outside my window right now, which is really cute.
Yeah, unfortunately, my screen inside of GoToWebinar is now hiding my questions.
Oh, I am trying to find that.
There we go, I got it.
Found it? Okay.
Okay. All right, so another question that we had, and this one actually came in ahead of time, was, and actually we covered this already, but we don't use a two-container architecture. Does that mean we cannot use BuildMaster?
Oh,
well,
right.
No, that's not at all what it means. Although we recommend using that two-container architecture, like I said before, using directly on Docker Hub for your application images will work fine. You would just only use a Docker CI/CD template instead. Honestly, you're still following the pattern. It's just your base image now is an image out on Docker Hub. You may have a slightly more complex Docker file because you have to include all the different layers to run your application, but we really support either path. We do recommend, though, storing your base image directly in your private registry, because it allows to give you that security, that compliance, and that repeatable process. And it also makes it a little bit easier for the developers, because now, instead of having to figure out which of the thousands do I choose from for my application, you have an approved list, and they just go into that small approved list. It's a lot easier to manage 5 than it is to manage 1,000.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, 5 versus 1,000. Yes, that does sound a little bit more manageable. Now, I have a question that I would love to hear the answer to. I know that in ProGet 5.3, one of the features that we are working on is being able to see where your containers are running. Can you explain how that's different from what you get with normally being able to see what's going on with a container?
Sure. So really the big difference here is that with Otter, you've already deployed things out. So Otter really has a track of where things live. So we can see not just what's running, but what version it's running and what server it's running on. So you kind of can maintain that history of those things. So when it comes to managing your registry, like, hey, I want to deprecate this base image or this application image, you can see, hey, this image is actually out running on a server. I can't just deprecate this. We need to upgrade this. With Kubernetes, we can also query the Kubernetes API, and we can see which containers are used in which nodes. So again, like, it really helps to know what's where, and not just what, but what version is out there.
Okay, interesting. Right. Then on behalf of the Inedo team, I am Lauren Camachi.
And I'm Rich Hessinger.
Thanks for joining us.